Well, I think I should start from the very beginning because most people don't know. As your child develops and they're not hitting their milestones, you start to realize something's different. And then you get plunged into a pool of the unknown. And as your child progresses, you're going to see more and more doctors. How it started with my oldest son, the doctor told me that he had a speech delay. And I thought it was because, I was teaching him 2 languages because I also speak French. And I know that as a language student myself, sometimes kids take a little longer while they're speaking another language. And they can also go backward. So he did have a little bit of language, and then it just sort of disappeared. And so moving forward, the doctor said, well, how do you feel about testing him for autism? I said, well, you're the doctor, of course, we'll do whatever you think. And from there, I found out that apparently if you have one child that has autism, you're more likely to have another one. And the special test that the doctor had performed, she can only start at 2 years old. So my older son was a little bit more at the line of where she couldn't do the test anymore. I think he was about 3. And then once he tested for autism, once the twins became 2 years old, then we tested them. And turns out that they also tested for autism. So then all of a sudden, I ended up with 3 toddlers that have autism. And I very quickly found myself in the deep end. I had to sign some special paperwork, and you had to have one parent in the room per child. So I brought my mom along as well. We tested the twins on the same day. So I went in with my daughter and my mom went in with my son. And essentially the doctor just was asking them a series of questions to evaluate if they understood and what their response was. And because both of them were predominantly non-speaking, she, I'm assuming, would look at their eye movement as well as their movements, and she used toys to facilitate her questioning as well. Obviously, I am not a doctor. I do not have special expertise in this, so this is just what I observed her do. I always felt that my children were very intelligent. I'm sure most people feel that way. But watching them go through this test confirmed it. Like that speech is not necessarily a reflection of intelligence. So my daughter would sit very calmly, which for a 2-year-old is already a win. And she kept looking back at me, essentially for approval, I think. Like, is this person safe? Is this okay? Am I allowed to do this? And every question the doctor would ask her, she'd look to the side. And I didn't need to nod or anything, but I think she was just very aware of the comfort level in the room. So if she could tell that mom felt comfortable, then she was comfortable. And then I started reaching out for programming for my children because I felt like, autism shouldn't hold them back. There has to be other people out here doing things. And as I reached around my area, I found there was not a lot. So that's sort of how I got into what I was doing, because I wanted my children to also have access to programs. And since there were none, I was starting to create access where there was none. There's a whole lot of paperwork that you can fill out. There are special schools. I started with my local public school. The local public school had a special pre-K program. So essentially, my first son started there. He would ride the bus to school. They had special teachers. But I think This was a personal preference for me. By the time he rode the bus into school, got out, the actual instruction part, he was only getting a couple hours a day. And I just felt like that wasn't enough. So then I started doing research. What else is out there? And I found that there's a thing called ABA schools. So I did a little bit of research on that, and I went out to visit some of these schools. I went to Lafayette, Crawfordsville. I'm from a very rural area of Indiana, so the closest one ended up being Crawfordsville. They seemed very polite and very excited to have my son there. So I ended up picking the one in Crawfordsville because the hours were better. But I'm glad that I did pick that school because they've been really attentive with my children, and they have one-on-one instruction. They work with them on a variety of real-world situations, things like using the bathroom. So a lot of people wouldn't think that that would be something that would be important, but sometimes children with autism learn later. And I'm not quite certain why that is. Could just be that they're not interested. So right now, all three of my children still wear diapers. They won't wear pull-ups. It's quite an expense. And then you find out about other programs. So it's just essentially jumping through one hoop after another. So when you start talking to people, you're like, oh, I didn't know about this program. How do I sign up for that? How do I get access to that? So I essentially was filling out paperwork under my stove light probably until midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning. Every single time I heard about another program that might be available to them, I applied for it. It is kind of interesting. I would say my experience with my own children is
What you doing?
They have superpowers when it comes to emotional sensing.
Eyes.
They sort of read a room. I wouldn't go as far as to say auras. I couldn't say for sure, but it's that sort of situation where they're super observant. They watch everything. They monitor the adults by the inflection in their voice, the tone of their voice. If someone seems to be irritated, their body movements. So they essentially had to utilize and maximize their other senses, which are very good. And it's really interesting that they also use that with each other. Autism is a spectrum. They had different terms in the past, and from what I understand, they decided that it was best to use autism spectrum disorder because it's so fluid, and every individual is different, and every individual develops differently. So my older son can speak. He has this thing called echolalia, where he'll repeat things. My daughter also speaks, same thing, but I think my older son uses echolalia more. And my youngest son is predominantly non-speaking. Apparently he does speak a little bit at school, and every once in a while he'll say something that surprises me. It'll just come out of nowhere. For example, the other day, and I think a lot of parents could probably relate to this, the only thing I ever really heard my younger son say was mama. That was about it. And maybe 3 or 4 days ago, he started saying mommy, really pronounced. And it almost made me cry because I'm so used to just hearing mama, or, he kind of does his own thing. He's the one that isolates a little more. To hear him say mommy, I literally had tears in my eyes because I thought, wow, he is getting there. I'm not quite sure what his language will look like, but for people that have autistic children that try so hard to find ways to communicate, they'll try ASL, they'll try baby sign language. Imagine being a prisoner of your own mind. There is a woman that I watched a talk she had the other day called Elizabeth Bonker. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But she speaks about this whole world of the non-speaking population. and how she hopes that people have faith in them because they can communicate. So there's actually this YouTube movie, which is excellent, and I want to do a little bit more research into that. It's called Spellers. And essentially, these parents that have found this alternative way to communicate swear that it's working. And my non-speaking son, and that's how I learned about the word non-speaking, was from this video. Most doctors and therapists will say nonverbal. Well, Elizabeth says that's not accurate because we're trapped in our own mind. So it's non-speaking. We just have to find another way to communicate. So they essentially use stencils, and they teach the person, whether it's a child or a grown adult, how to utilize that stencil with the alphabet to speak. And they can do it. Miss Rachel is a huge hit in our house. My kids respond really well to Miss Rachel. Anything that has songs, puzzles, they do really well with anything music and arts. And I think it's interesting to see how especially non-speakers evolve. And I think they do find alternative means to communicate. And some of that might be through music. So every time I run into something else like that, it gives me more and more hope that I'm going the right direction and there are more like me out there. So as I learn more things, I try and pass that knowledge, because I remember what it was like when I didn't understand what was going on, because I didn't have an educational base for that. No one ever thinks when you get pregnant, oh, I might have a child with autism, and what that may look like. And then all of a sudden I end up with 3. So my world changes automatically, and everything that I used to do changes. And because all I want for my children is for them to have the opportunity to do the same things that I did. Ride a bike, have friends, go to a concert, which is where the Color the Experience Festival came from. Rock climbing, races, anything you can think of.